We start the week with an in-depth discussion on the global economy. Governments around the world are rushing to protect their economies from a crushing recession as the COVID-19 outbreak continues to spiral across the world, paralysing all sectors and wiping out millions of jobs. We're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars being injected into national economies, interest rates slashed and subsidies rolled out to cushion the blow. But is this enough? And what about countries that can't afford huge stimulus plans? Today, we're joined by Dr. Kaushik Basu, Professor of Economics at Cornell University, who served as the Chief Economist of the World Bank from 2012 to 2016. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure to be talking to you.
Well, first of all, we're seeing many countries taking measures like rate cuts and massive stimulus plans. We won't really go into the specific details there, but it looks like with most of the world's largest economies going under lockdown, financial markets are still volatile. So why do you think these usual textbook approaches are failing to provide reassurance?
Let me tell you right away that I'm feeling very happy about the huge stimulus package announced by the United States. You need that. You need the usual moves of rates being cut, liquidity being injected into the system. But as your question implies, there is a sense that many of these usual stimuluses, the positive effect of which you begin to see immediately, you're not seeing on this occasion. And there is a very good reason for that. A pandemic-induced recession, and I don't think there should be any second thoughts on this. We are going to go into a recession. The question is for how long. But a pandemic-induced recession is very different from an overall macroeconomic recession because different sectors get hit very differently. There will be some sectors where suddenly there is no demand. No one is flying. Airline industry is crashing. Hotels, no demand. Tourism, no demand. So economies, for instance, like Italy, which rely a lot on tourism, those sectors go crashing. And you suddenly see a spike in demand for other goods. So there are other sectors where there's a spike in demand. The biggest one is medical supplies, facilities, hospitals, intensive care unit. There's a spike in demand. So it is not an overall shortage in demand or excess in demand that you can correct with an overall package. The overall money you need, but then you have to do a lot of fine tuning. Very quickly divert resource from the hotel industry to the hospital industry. The government cannot do it alone. The private sector cannot do it alone. You need subsidies, you need incentives. So a lot is going to depend on how we manage to fine tune the big amount of money that we are raising into different sectors, move resources from one to the other. So this is not just a question of overall macroeconomic management, but a lot of microeconomic details. And that is the dangerous, risky part of a pandemic-induced recession management.
So with the impact being so wide-ranging, well, as you said, it's a matter of getting things done fast and really effectively, and it's really hard to just fine-tune those details, though. But many optimists, though, they're hoping for a V-shaped recovery to the world economies, and maybe the numbers will add up eventually, but what are the chances that jobs won't recover as quickly?
So there are two things about, economists love to play with alphabets, whether it'll be V-shaped, U-shaped, W-shaped, we keep debating these. I am optimistic enough that while we will get a recession, it will not be too long-lasting. We'll probably see a little bit of wobble at the bottom. It won't be a V, just sort of picking up immediately, but a little bit of wobble at the bottom and then begin to pick up.
Maybe a W.
Maybe a W with a smaller second U, hopefully. The problem is with labor, a very unusual problem. Labor globally has been facing a challenge over the last 10 years, 20 years. Actually, I've got data over the last 40 years, which show that the wage bill in most advanced economies, Korea included, the GDP that goes as wages to workers is shrinking as a share. And that's not surprising. Modern technology is coming and taking over. This has a very interesting interconnection with the current pandemic. People are switching to digital use, hugely. People who are, for instance, not that used to it are getting into it. I am going to next week be lecturing to my Cornell class, sitting here to a big class of mid-career students entirely by Zoom to a class of 50. I don't know how long that will last. This kind of lecturing can last for several months because even after the worst pandemic is gone, you do not want to get big groups together. So this is going to cause a technology shift and us getting comfortable with a level of a certain kind of technology, which will have a long run effect on labor. So I feel our immediate focus has to be, yes, unemployment is going to spike. We know from American data that claims for unemployment benefit about 2 weeks ago spiked by 30%. Suddenly people were wanting this benefit. So there is an immediate problem for which you have to give money to people, give direct support to people, the workers who are being laid off. But there is a long run problem which we were already facing over the last 10, 20 years. That's going to get more acute because I feel this is going to see a technology shift of the world coming out of it, more tech savvy than it was even 6 months ago. And there'll be a new round of long run adjustment to labor. Big topic. I have a lot of interest in it, but that's not an immediate topic, so I will not bear on that anymore now.
So when the worst of this pandemic is over, we might see workers not only out of jobs, but suddenly at loss of what to do because their skills might not be so relevant anymore with technology having replaced what they can actually do.
Yes.
Well,
so should I comment on that? Because I have actually
taken
a lot of interest in this. There are two things that we'll have to do, and this is a bit of a long run plan. So over the next 5 years to make things better for workers, I feel there are two things we have to do. Workers will gradually move into more of the creative sectors. So a whole lot of more people will be doing research, will be doing creative work, and we will have to skill our workers to be able to do that. Whole lot of people will move into the medical sector. I feel as the world progresses, a lot of our attention will go to not just having more cars and more houses, but much better healthcare. Scope is huge. So the workers will have to be shifted to sectors in a big way, new sectors. That's number one that we have to do. Another thing, I know this is very often considered a radical prescription, but I feel increasingly workers will have to get a share of profits. So not a huge amount, you don't want to distort incentives, but a share of profits ought to go to workers. Just like shareholders get income from the shares, workers should own shares and begin to earn something. This is a long run thing. There are economists in America, economists around the world who are beginning to talk about it. Also, if I may mention, big changes took place during the Industrial Revolution because that's the only way we could survive. And we are in that kind of a moment where we have to think of big changes if we want our workers to survive, us to survive.
So what we need to do is have a very frank discussion about where this is all heading beyond the virus itself. And in terms of coordinating such efforts, we're actually seeing lots of national borders close, and there's some finger pointing going on between world leaders and a general lack of cross-border coordination. And even in the EU, the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she announced a huge bond buying programme to stimulate the regional economy. But then this gave rise to concern that old feuds from the 2008 financial crash might actually resurface. In these ways, what are the risks of politics hindering global cooperation amid this pandemic?
This is very unfortunate because what we are facing today is a common challenge to humanity. And we have to take it in that spirit. And I have to put in a word about Korea. The way Korea reacted initially has become exemplary of reaching out to all its people, etc. But we have to do that at a global level. And as always happens, during a time of crisis, you begin to look after your immediate interests. But we have to realize that there is actually no such thing as my immediate interest. It's a collective interest today. I feel bodies like G20, international organizations, United Nations, the World Bank, and I've actually had some conversations with some of these groups, ought to step in to coordinate policies better, because the main thing that happens, the economic side that takes over, is you worry that every time you do something, your exchange rate is going to move, and you will find it difficult to export goods. That's usually what causes a breakdown in global coordination, because I say, I'm not going to do something which hurts my exchange rate. There, the G20 had played a very, very good role in 2008 during the Great Recession. And I feel bodies like G20, UN, World Bank, IMF ought to step onto the dais today in a big way to help with global coordination of policies.
I see. And actually, advanced economies, we can see them trying to act very fast, and they can actually, well, they can muster up the financial resources needed to have these huge stimulus plans. But what about developing economies, though? Take countries like Botswana, for instance, which is very heavily dependent on income from exports of diamonds, and countries like Vietnam, where it's very labor intensive. What about these economies? How vulnerable are they to this pandemic recession?
I'm glad you're asking the question, because Vietnam, Botswana, Bangladesh relies on exports to the world in a big way. One interesting thing, which I don't know, I'm not a medical person, the incidence of the pandemic hitting in Africa, in South Asia, is much lower than in a whole host of other countries like European countries. And this is actually true in a band from Latin America, Africa, South Asia. But that must not, first of all, make you feel that it's not coming. It can come down the road. Number two, even if the pandemic does not hit very badly, we live in a globalized world. And if the global connectivities backfire, these countries, relatively poor countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam, they are going to be hit very, very badly. And this is also where the G20 has to come in. International organizations have to come in, put in money to support them. Even if they don't get the pandemic, let's hope they don't get it very badly, unlike the way some of the countries have got it. Let's hope it goes down everywhere. But we need financial support for these countries. And luckily, if these countries face the brunt of exports going down, it'll be a lot of conventional policies you will need. Money to be injected, etc. So we are well equipped with that. We need the money for it.
I see. And the World Bank actually pledged $14 billion, if I remember correctly, into supporting these developing economies. But would you say that's enough, or is there a finance gap?
No, there is a finance gap, but the gap is not being felt too much as yet, because the emerging economies are not yet organized to make use of the money very well. So there's going to be a financial gap that will emerge within the next weeks, because all this is happening at such great speed. So that money is not enough. I'm glad that has started, but we have to muster up much more money, and then also help these countries to very quickly execute the expenditure of this money, so they are ready when the global recession probably is starting up now. The little bits of numbers coming out from United States, from China, suggest that it is coming in, the global recession. But these countries now should be prepared, the developing countries, because they are the least able to handle them.
It does look like fast action needs to be taken, though, because this spread, it's obviously going to spread to developing economies as well. And it seems that when we as a global community aren't really focusing or paying much attention on addressing the possible issues that we could see there. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much, Dr. Basu, for joining us from Mumbai.
Thank you very much. I hope we could be talking in better times, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is also where we end the show. Thank you for starting your week with us, and we hope you tune in at the same time tomorrow for more global insights on issues making headlines. Goodbye.